Hi, my name is Ash Hunt. I'm a global Chief Information Security Officer with over a decade of experience in information security, and in particular, quantifying information risk. In this masterclass today, we're going to focus on how to build an effective technology risk management program. It's hard for cyber teams, and technology teams indeed, to know where to begin when identifying risk. Qualitative approaches inevitably end up forcing organizations to log generic, tech-related problems, vulnerabilities, or control deficiencies into an ever-expanding risk register. And it never shrinks. These problems are then assigned a random numeric label or score, and or indeed a subjective ranking. It may be compliant, but is it an effective way to manage our technology risk portfolio? The foundation of any effective technology risk management program is to focus on foundational principles: loss exposure and decision analytics. The business wants to achieve things, and in doing so, incurs loss. What investment decisions in the tech space can we make to help reduce the extent of that harm and support wider business opportunity? This will help technology teams to define what type of loss scenarios, risks, are manifesting in damage today. Specificity is key. In order to articulate risk, professionals have to be choice about what the scenario looks like. There will always be a threat, an internal or external agent of harm, either adversarial, accidental, or environmental in nature. There'll be a threat event, which is the action, or indeed lack thereof, initiated by that threat against an asset, which is capable of causing harm. We then have the asset itself, a valuable part of our technology estates that can be exploited to cause the loss. To do so, we have a vulnerability, a weakness in the asset, which could be exploited by one or indeed many threats. And finally, the loss effect. This is that effect of harm through breaching the confidentiality, integrity, and or availability. That's our risk scenario, our loss scenario. Without those elements, we have an unstructured concern at best, and without the parameters necessary to begin measuring that problem. Typically, this can be conducted within security or risk teams. But true effective technology risk management relies on a fusion between the business and security. This is brought to the fore most clearly through data capture. In order to measure the amount of uncertainty we retain around a risk scenario, that's to say how probable loss is within a given time, we need to collect data to support our estimates. This exercise brings technology and the business together. Analysts will need to capture a range of data points to support estimates, such as salary averages, revenue per minute over a particular system, client retention, prospective businesses, etc. All risk is business risk, so without those elements, we'll only ever be capturing half the problem. It's worth noting as well that on the flip side of every risk is an opportunity. This is an important perception because it can help prevent technology being perceived as a cost center. Indeed, each time an investment is made to remediate a risk, the reduction in loss exposure should be tied back to a business opportunity that has, as a byproduct, been made available to generate increased revenue and growth. Now, when we say investment, in the majority of circumstances, we mean controls. Technology, operation, or security processes that safeguard us against risk. Controls are one of the greatest focal areas to swiftly transform our technology risk management program. They can, and indeed should, be mapped to threat events, so you can swiftly determine coverage against given scenarios. Control operational deficiencies represent our extent of vulnerability also. Now, I don't mean a particular CVE. I mean that if your controls are collectively operating 85% effectively against a given scenario, then quantitatively we know we're at least 15% vulnerable, even if we don't know the detail of the vulnerability. This is a useful way to begin estimating the probability of a risk occurring. The percentage of time our controls aren't operating as they should is a representation of the opportunity the threat event has from successfully causing the loss. As CISOs and security leaders, you know the cost of your controls. And even if you have manual control processes that aren't quite design effective, you can still measure the cost of running those processes for your business. This means we have a way to measure return on our, and indeed the business's, investments. That's to say how much loss exposure is actually reduced through spend on control improvements. Focusing on controls will also help professionals avoid the major pitfall of traditional cyber and information risk management approaches, namely the obsession with inherent risk. Most traditional approaches want professionals to measure inherent risk without consideration of their controls. This is ultimately a fruitless exercise because no organization in history has ever existed with zero controls. Yes, many exist with very poor control environments, but controls inevitably are brought into existence as activity in the business is conducted. When conducting risk analysis, modeling, and assessments, organizations should measure their current loss exposure. That's to say, what it would look like if the incident happened today within your existing control environment. Afterwards, organizations should then run the same analysis, but this time based on hypothetical control improvements. So what would the same incident look like in a parallel universe if my organization had X, Y, and Z better controls? You would expect to see a lower level of loss exposure. The delta of loss between these two scenarios against the cost of the proposed control improvements can provide your risk-spend efficiency. That's to say the amount of risk production gained per pound or per dollar invested. If organizations run this analytical process across all of their significant loss scenarios, decision-making becomes much clearer, furnishing security leaders with the ability to make informed investment decisions based on accurate prioritization. I've had direct experience of this, assisting a multinational financial services organization with an issue around their cyber insurance. They had a particular issue where their policies were becoming increasingly expensive year on year, despite the fact that they were making investments in their cybersecurity program. When I came in and I looked at the way that they were measuring their risk, it was exactly that. They were taking inherent risk scenarios without any control consideration and then trying to determine a residual risk. That posture was never truly reflective of their realistic loss exposure. I then went to try and formulate the kind of loss scenarios that they were actually concerned about and that would actually cause them harm. We then again looked at their existing control environment and, more importantly, how effectively their existing controls were performing. We then looked at actually how effective could those controls be performing and began to determine what investment mechanisms we had at our disposal to improve the operational effectiveness of those controls. We also did this for very specific scenarios and not for every single risk that the organization was carrying. And this led to two very positive outcomes. The first was a reduction in the policy costs. Why? Because the insurer wasn't having to insure absolutely every risk relating to technology or cyber or information security. Indeed, it was focusing on those specific scenarios which the organization did not have the capital to withstand. Again, a very targeted control measure. And secondly, it also demonstrated to the insurers that we were focusing on the targeted investment that delivered the biggest bang for buck for the organization, both in terms of the financial risk spend efficiency and also in terms of security value. This masterclass has shown that if we structure loss scenarios appropriately and focus on a control investment model, this will absolutely transform technology risk management into true decision management.